Well, hello. Thank you so much for joining me this week. We are in week 3 of January 2022, which means you are joining me as we quilt together. Well, I am going to use a book called Quilt in a Day, Quilters Almanac, Quilt Block Party, series number 3. It is by Eleanor Burns and it's copyright 1991. And so I'm going to show you what my book looks like. I don't know if this was a gift from someone or if it was one I inherited when my grandmother pared down her quilting. However, it's a fantastic book. And she talks about in January 1990, Quilt in a Day friends met to plan a year of quilt making, and they brought ideas, quilt block patterns, recipes, but most of all, they brought joy of old-time quilting togethers. So that's why they're calling them block parties, and it's really fun. There's a couple of pages that talk about how much yardage you need, and what we are doing here, or what the goal is to create the same quilt, but hopefully using your own stash of fabrics. That's what I'm doing with mine, is using fabrics from my personal stash, which is very extensive and a little out of control, but all the more reason, right? So trying to find coordinating fabrics was really kind of a challenge for me because I do put them in colors, but I'd forgotten I'd had some that I'm going to use for this. So it's not going to look exactly the same because the way they use it. So things to think about. So the best thing to use for a quilt is 100% cotton, and there are cottons that aren't as high quality as others. I personally don't care. If I like the way it feels, I don't care if it's a lower quality quilt cotton or a more expensive quilt cotton. This is your quilt. This is for you to decide what you want to do with. And as long as this quilt brings you joy, I don't care if it's made out of corduroy. Just make something that you're going to love. She recommends with this quilt, we're going to create 12 blocks this year. The finished size is 57 inches by 70 inches. So it's about like a twin size. I think it would be at least a twin size. It's a twin size quilt. Sorry, tripping over my words. She recommends light. She says, first of all, when choosing your fabrics for each new block during the year, select fabrics different from those in the adjacent completed blocks. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to be using this same fabric throughout the entire quilt, but you can make this a patchwork one of sorts, but I have enough of this fabric that it's not a problem. She's recommending that you have 1.5 yards of one light fabric, or 3/4 yards each of 2 different light fabrics, medium and dark. She says you should choose 3/4 yard each of 2 different mediums and a 3/4 yard each of 2 different darks is what she's recommending. So at the end of the day, you could have as many, or if you're just wanting to buy 3/4 yards, choose 4 fabrics at 3/4 of a yard and you should have plenty. I know I have more than that here. The lattice is usually a solid color around. She's recommending you use a 1 1/8 yard, and I'll show you what I'm going to be using for that. Border 1 1/4 yards, backing 3.5 yards. Then she also has bonded batting. And she also talks about binding for machine quilting. And then I'm going to tie this quilt. I am not going to put the sandwich together and machine quilt. I'm going to tie it because that's how I'm going to do it. And she does recommend that. And it's called an unquilted finish. Use a curved needle and embroidery floss. I use yarn. I just tie yarn and that works for me, but embroidery floss is a great thing. And I might do it for this one. I don't know. She also, on page 3, goes into a lot of great detail on how to use this Quilters Almanac. So it's really, really kind of fun. And this is what I love. She has this wonderful calendar here that you could write in if you want, or you could print it if you want. And it's kind of nice because you know how busy life gets. I already have a calendar I use to keep myself in line, but she has a chicken Devon quiche recipe by Debbie Smith in here, and I love this recipe. This is a recipe I've used and adapted, and I use it with my leftovers a lot. And I mentioned that a few times last year as we were going through the Queen of the Castle, and I will add the my brain just went out the door. This is one that I will either make this year in some of my cooking, or I may go ahead and add it into the description. I'm not exactly sure, but definitely read the description. There's stuff in there. But we are working on, where's our quilt block for this month? January. This is going to be our quilt block this month, and it's called Wandering Star. So this kind of gives you a basic idea of what you're making. And what we're going to do is I will be filming as I go through the process of creating this. And it's nice because it's just one page of instruction, which is really nice. I'm going to go ahead and show you my 4 fabrics I'm using for the main part of like these quilt squares. So I will show you that. This is fabric I picked up, I don't know how many years ago. This is the same fabric. This has a light pink background. This has a lovely light blue pattern. And then this again is the same pattern, except the same light pink as this one. And this is the same light blue as this one. So these were obviously designed to work together. Another thing you can do is if you find a fabric that you really love that maybe has lots of colors on it, down here it shows you all of the colors. And this is just a Joann's. And I've heard people say, oh, Joann's quilt fabric, it's nothing. I'm telling you what, I really don't care. It's my quilt. I'm going to do it how I want. So I have had no issues with using Joann's quilting fabric. But down here you see all these beautiful colors. So if you're struggling, and it's kind of neat though, because you don't think that there's red in there, but if you look down here, number 6 is a pretty beautiful red. You could pair this with a red, and surprisingly it would look lovely together. So but I'm just going to keep it very muted and just keep these 4. And then as I was looking through my fabric stash, this I think is going to be my backing because it's a very large print and it does look rather lovely with it. So, and then the other fabric, and this might make you laugh, to me, the best fabrics to back a quilt is a sheet. And I have this really great sheet, and it has these little roses in it. I'm going to use this probably for some of that border, and I might use leftovers from some of these other fabrics for the borders as well, but this will be one of the borders that I use on that quilt. And which I think this is plenty big enough, but you know, you never know. It looks like I only have about 2 yards of this, so this isn't quite big enough to back that quilt. So it might be I'll have to piece together the back of that quilt, but that's okay because I've got all of this fabric that will help me with that. I just don't want to cut this down. Oh, look, see here on the side here? It has all of the colors that are in here. And if you go to compare them, you're going to find a lot of them match up, and that's why these work together, because there's enough in the same. And it has, this is a suburban Cortile. A Cyrus Clark design, Cortile, a Cyrus Clark design, exclusively by Suburban Fabrics. So again, not sure where this piece came from. It could have been from someone downsizing their fabric hoard, or me finding a great deal. I upcycle a lot of fabric, or I will buy out people who are getting rid of fabric and downsizing their fabric hoard. So anyhow, just excited for you to join me this week as we endeavor into some quilt blocks, and I hope that you learn something and have a good time in the process. Blessings. Well, if you are still watching this video, which I hope you are, I had to go back and re-look at what the yardage was, because in my head I just needed 4 fabrics for basically the quilt block, and I realized no, I need 5, or you could do 6. So since you can do 2 light, I'm going to stick with 1 light, and I'm choosing this one as my light, which was the portion of the sheet is what that one was. And then it says to pick 2 different mediums. So I'm choosing these ones with the smaller print as my mediums in the blue and the pink. And then these 2, which are the larger print, as my darks. So they are the same. If you look at them, it is the same exact pink and it is the same exact blue. It's just the busyness of it that is determining for me what is a light or a medium versus a dark. There's more happening in this one, so there it to me is darker than this. But you can swap it however you like, but that's how I'm choosing to do mine. So I'm hoping that you are into your fabric stash and you're able to get what you need. I went ahead and I separated 3/4 of a yard of each of these, all 4 of these, and then 1.5 yards of this fabric so that I have it together. My excess is here in my bag with the backing fabric, which I'm going to use whatever's left over of this fabric to finish off the back, because it's not going to be quite the same size that I need it to be in the end. So yes, with that said, let's get to quilting. We are going to prep quilt block 1. So stay with me and we will get that going, and I will reconfigure my camera to make it work so that you can see what's going on. Okay, so here I am taking my light fabric, and you're going to notice here I'm just using a ruler and a pen, and I am using scissors to just cut a small nick in the fabric, and then I am doing a ripping method. And you can do this with cottons, especially if you're cutting along the grain. I'm sure there's a better word for that. The weft, the warp, yeah, but we're not gonna mess with that. So what I'm doing is I am cutting a 5-inch strip, and then in this light fabric, you need 1 5-inch by 10-inch piece, and you need 2 5-inch by 5-inch pieces. Go a little snip there, little snip there, little snip there, and then I tear. And you'll see there's tons of these strings. So this was a sheet in its former life, and now it is going to just be the light fabric and possibly part of the border, possibly part of the back at some point. But right now I'm just getting those pieces put aside. Our next fabric, so it wants me to pick a medium fabric. I'm choosing the medium pink. And with this one, you want 1 5-inch by 10-inch piece. And that's it. And because I'm doing it from selvage to selvage, I'm trimming off and tearing off the selvage on one side. And then that starts my guide for one side of the piece. And I'm measuring out 10 inches, clipping, and there we go. I'm not using the blue medium fabric on this one. Then it wants me to take the dark fabric, and remember my dark fabrics are basically a busier print on the blue and a busier print on the pink. So on this one, it wants you to do 1 5x5, and I had been reading the instructions a little wrong and so I thought, oh my goodness, I need an entire strip, and I really didn't. I just needed one 5x5 piece and one 5.5 by 5.5 inch piece of my quote unquote dark fabrics. So I went ahead and just left that in there because at one point I thought for some reason doubled and thought, oh, I need 2 of these. And the answer is no. You just need one 5x5 in the dark. See there, I showed you I need 2. No, you just need one 5x5. And then here I'm taking the other, what I'm calling my dark 2 fabric. And I'm, again, doing a strip. I'm just hoping that in some of the other ones that I'm doing that they require a 5-inch strip because I've got all this 5-inch strip. And no, I have not looked ahead. Are you kidding? We're just in January. There's 11 more blocks to go. But if not, I do have extra fabric, and then this would just end up in my scrap pile. But here I am thinking, oh, I need 2 of these. No, you just need one 5x5. Just one. Oh dear. Just one. Oh no, Amber, you are wrong. You don't need 2. You just need one. Now I'm going back on my dark fabrics and I'm cutting out, and here I'm getting smarter. Like, oh, okay, I'm just going to cut out a 5.5, measure it, 5.5. And then honestly, the best thing to do after you have done this is just set a nice hot iron on these fabrics. And just because as you do this, you do, you know, stretch the fabric a little bit. So just go ahead and you should, if you want things to be more accurate, then you should press them and get some of that warping out. I don't, because, you know, I'm one of those, I'm totally fine with a scrappy, Mod Podgey quilt. To me, it covers up more of my mistakes. So there we go. I need a 5.5 by 5.5 of that, cutting the selvage off. So there's that. Okay, so now we're taking our light 5x5 fabric, and with the 2 of these, you're going to, I'm used to using a pencil and a ruler, and you're going to draw a line from point to point, or from corner to corner. And then you're going to match that up with your dark fabric. So you should have one for your dark or I guess 2 dark fabrics. So you're going to pin it to 2 of your dark 5x5. And yeah, then you're going to take your white or your light 5x10. I'm folding it in half and finding a point in the middle. And what you're going to do is you're going to, from that point at the top, you're going to draw a line to each of the opposite corners to create a triangle. And then you're going to want to pin those together. There we go. So you're pinning that to the medium fabric that you chose. Now I'm taking the 5.5 by 5.5 inch squares, and I am just drawing a pencil line from corner to corner to create an X, and then I'm double checking as I'm reading this, like, what's going on here? Then you cut these, so you create 4 small triangles in each of your dark fabrics that are 5.5 by 5.5. Okay, here we're taking the 5x10 blocks that I have drawn the triangle on. And this was a little, I've never done this process before, but it's having you from that line that we drew, do a 1/4 inch hem or stitch on each side. I said hem, it's not a hem, a stitch on each side. And this was, like I said, a little confusing for me. I didn't understand that, like, how in the world is that going to, I mean, obviously you're going to cut it on the lines, but then how was it going to open? So just trust the process. There is a purpose for this, and we will get there at some point. But here I'm just stitching to the end, turning, clipping, and going again. Now, all of this footage that I'm doing here, that I'm doing voiceovers for, is sped up a little bit so that you're not watching the entire process in real time, but just to kind of give you an idea. I'm being very careful. I'm not sewing over my pins. I'm not backstitching. You're going to notice that, and I'll explain that later why I don't backstitch. But I don't backstitch when I'm putting these pieces together. The main reason, like as I'm going along here, is if I need to seam rip anything, it's a lot easier. But in the end, if you keep following, you're going to see where I messed up and I had to do some seam ripping. But here I just pivoted. This is on the inside of that triangle that I drew. I just pivoted at the top, and then I'm doing a 1/4 inch seam on the inside and clipping. Right here I'm taking the 5x5 blocks, and again on both sides of that line that we drew, you're going to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance. And that little white thing you're seeing in the bottom right corner, that is like a Dollar Tree little hands thing that I use to hold my camera. And then here we go again. So I'm just, saving time. I do this on both sides, but I lost the footage for the second side, so we're gonna skip that and go right into cutting. So this has lines on both sides, and I'm just cutting on the line. So I have stitching lines on both sides. So I'm just cutting on the line that I drew with pencil. And this is the dark and light fabric. I'm going to cut both of those. I'm trying to show you the line where I'm cutting on the line. That I don't usually cut at this wonky angle. It's just trying to help you. And then here is that 5x10. And here's where I'm going, wow, what are they wanting me to do? So I'm cutting on the line here. And then you see when you cut the first one off, it becomes a little 5x5 triangle, or 4 1/4 squared triangle, or whatever. 4 1/2, I think. Here we go. So there's the other side of that 5x10 I cut off. And then I'm looking at this middle and going, there is no way I'm going to be able to open this up the way it is sewn. So I realized, oh, I need to put a line down the middle. So I fold it in half, long ways, and I create a crease. And you could draw a pencil mark. I chose not to. I chose to just cut on that crease mark. And so this 5x10 becomes 4 of those blocks that you need. So there we go. So that's the light with the medium 1. So the 5x10 block was a 5x10 with the light and medium 1 fabric I chose. And here I'm pressing it. Now I'm trying to steam it, like what is going on? But I set the seam, and I want the seam or the bulk of the fabric to be on the dark side, which in this case is the medium 1. And I go through and I press all these. Now at some point I realized my iron isn't on, so it's kind of shocking to me how even the weight of with finger pressing and the weight of the iron can help. And you really don't want to wiggle your iron. I have a tendency to wiggle my iron, always have, but it can stretch the seams and they can make your quilt a bit wonky. So just keep that in mind. The best way to set the seams is just to set the iron down, let it cool for a moment, open it up, press down, just like set it down and just let it do its thing. Let the iron do the work, but bad habits sometimes are hard to break. So I just kind of batch this all together, and yeah, I'm not keeping all of the footage in here, but I just wanted to show you that this is what I do. And yes, I need to replace my ironing board fabric. Not today. I have other things. Apparently I'm going to press it all for you. I thought I had cut out some of this fabric, or some of this. So I'm going to stop and make sure I get that cut out so you're not watching me for 4 minutes. Here I am putting together the 5.5 squares. So it was the 2 dark fabrics that I had cut into 5.5 squares, and then drew lines from corner to corner and across, and then I cut them. And now what I'm doing is I'm following the instructions, putting these triangles together. So what you're wanting to do is put one of each of the dark colors together. So I've got one pink on one side and one blue on the other. And then I'm going to take the other two, following the instructions. I want them to be the pink to hit on the opposite side when I put this all together. So trying to get as good footage as I can. You know, explaining this is a challenge for me. So this is going to be a year of growth in explaining quilting techniques or whatever. But again, I highly recommend the book. It shows this process or explains it a little bit better here. So now I'm sandwiching those two together, trying to put, have the seams nest together and pin. I have a tendency to just kind of pin where the seams meet to try and get as on point as possible, and did fairly well on this one. Believe me, I have many quilts where they aren't on point, and honestly, when this all comes together, or another quilt square that we work on, they may not be on mine, and I just don't want you to beat yourself up. If this is your first quilt, this block is considered an easy block, and I felt like it was easy once I understood how they were writing, or what their instructions were. So here we are now. I'm opening this up and just really trying to get those seams down. Oh look, my iron's on. Do you see that steam? Love that. Love that. And I just keep ironing it until it's as flat as I like it. The more you have bulk, you don't want to feel that. So I'm just really trying to get those down. And yeah, there we go. There's the square. I gotta get better lighting in here. And here's where I'm kind of squaring up those as best as possible. It says to square up all of the blocks to 4.5 inches square. So now I'm pulling out my little quilting accessories and just squaring things up and removing the excess. And honestly, on some of the quilts I've done in the past, I haven't done this. I just kind of center things. I'd get lazy. I'd center things and I would just sew them together. And you end up with excess fabric, and that's where it's like, oh goodness. So when you go to tie it or actually, do the finished quilting, it can be an issue. So again, I just kind of batch these all together, kind of like I do with my ironing, and I just square it up. And here's what the block looks like. And it looks like when I put it together like this, that it looks right. And then what you're doing is I'm showing in this row here, you put these two pieces together and you have this two piece, and that's one row. And then you take the next row, you put these two pieces together here, right sides together, of course, 1/4 inch seam allowance. And then you do that last row. And this is a very common technique in any quilt. And then you put, there you go, row 3 to row 2, or however you want to do it, row 1 to row 2 first, it doesn't matter. 1/4 inch seam allowance. And so here we go. I am just sewing these all together, right sides together, 1/4 inch seam allowance. There we go. There's row 1.
of the block. Row 2. And you can mark these if you want. I've used sticky notes. I've used just scratch paper and pinned them. You know, whatever you need to do to make it so that it's easier for you. If you did this whole quilt in the Wandering Star pattern, I would definitely do that. I've done that with my fabrics to differentiate between medium 1 and medium 2. So that when I get, 4 weeks from now, when I get into, or 5 weeks from now, when I get to our February square, I remember what I'm doing in regards to what I classify as the light, medium 1, medium 2, dark 1, dark 2, so that I can continue the pattern on however, so that I'm consistent throughout, basically. So here we go. Row 3 is done. So I'm nesting the seams together. I want those to meet on point, and so by doing that, we have a tendency to open up the seam and iron so that there's fabric on each side. But when you're quilting, the best thing to do is push that seam over, and I really should have pressed these down before I did this, but I didn't do that. I just went ahead and pinned it where the seams meet, and when you iron it, it honestly makes it a lot easier. But I'm just trying to show you how I'm trying to nest those seams as nicely as possible, and then I'm just starting on the edge, and all I really care about is that those seams meet right there beautifully. And I'm pushing, the top fabric on this one through the machine, and the bottom is catching going the opposite way. So what I found is if the middle one, our center square of this block, if basically all of its seams were pressed out, it just worked better for me. So here we go. Now I'm doing the top one, adding that, or vice versa. It doesn't matter if it's the top first or the bottom first or whatever, but basically one of them has to connect to the middle block, or the middle, and then you have to add the other one. So that's all I'm doing here, is just adding it, making sure those seams are meeting as nicely as possible. I'm trying to be as I take a lot of cut a lot of corners, but I am trying to tell you about some of the good practices you should be doing in order to have the ideal quilt. I'm just not as nitpicky or as OCD as some might be. And here I'm just pulling my iron back out. Yeah, it needs to be clean. Oh yeah, there's that beautiful iron cover again that I need to replace, but not today. And I just go in here and I just try and see how it's gonna lay, and I just start ironing down, pressing those down, and I one area at a time. Try not to go overboard. Just take your time, get it pressed down. And then I flip it and I feel it and make sure those seams are resting where they should be. And here I'm wiggling again. So sorry about that. It's just a really bad habit. I know it is. Just pressing it all down, getting it all nice. So yeah, so tearing fabric can, affect it so that it's a little wonky, and then doing this as well. So all of those things can stretch fabric. But yeah.
All right, so we made it through the block, and I think it's adorable. This is my dark one. Is this my dark one? And that's my dark two, or vice versa. But I have it pinned inside my bag of what I refer to. So this is what the Wandering Star looks like for January, or mine does. And so you'll see this ends up being a lot of white. Every now and then you'll see a little flower poke through with that bed sheet I'm using. But I do really like how this turned out. A couple things. You know, this is my first time actually going through this book and using these directions. And so it was a little bit confusing to me at first. It says in parentheses, 1 5x10 light and 1 5x10 medium, and then over on the side it says 4. So I cut out 4 5x10 light and 4 5x10 of my medium 1. And so I ended up with a lot of extras. So I'm not going to discard these. There might be one in a later one that I can use these, or there's another trick I have up my sleeve that I have seen another YouTuber do, and I will find that YouTuber when I get to the backing, and I will make sure and direct you to her, because she does an amazing job. Everyone that I watch on YouTube that does the quilting that I follow, I just am amazed. The other thing was I was supposed to do it says 1 5-inch square light and 1 5-inch square dark. And I did, and it says you'll end up with 2. And I ended up cutting out 2. Yeah. See my dilemma? So I ended up with 2 extra of these ones and 2 extra of these ones. So, moral of the story. I've learned now that the 1 is referencing actually cutting out 1. And I'm no longer going to let the little mark on the right of the diagram to throw me off. It was a fairly simple project. I know that it is fast how I am going through it, and I'm just following the instructions. And so I just want to encourage you. I'm not going to take pictures of this and put it on because it's not my book. I'm just kind of showing you how my process of going through using this, and I'm just super excited to share that with you. And just want to thank you for joining me today. And I wanted to mention next week, what am I doing next week? Last week we did cooking in the kitchen, or cook with me, I don't know, cooking in the kitchen. And I showed you my Irish stew recipe, and I did mention, if you look at the stuff down below, what is the difference between Irish stew and maybe what you grew up making. And I also referenced in there the seasoning, the stew seasoning I used, and where I got that online. Next week is our 4th week of the month, and so we're going to be playing dress up next week. So I'm super excited about that, and I've got so many ideas running through my head, and I'm trying to keep them as simple as possible. And the hard part too is I want to do hair and makeup in the process of that, so that I can kind of show you what I do to grab the essence of that character that I am dressing up as. So I'm going to put this away. I'm going to have my star hanging up because it's just beautiful, my Wandering Star. And once we get to March, and we get the February and March of these done, we'll be able to put our first row together. So that is just exciting, and I'm going to put them up next to each other so that you can kind of see what they look like as you kind of put them together. So anyway, blessings to you. Thank you for joining me. I hope you've enjoyed this quilt with me, quilt block called Wandering Star, in this book, Quilt in a Day, Quilters Almanac, Quilt Block Party, series number 3 from Eleanor Burns. Take care, and I'll see you next week. I'm looking up at my star. See what I see. Yeah. So see how this is important even afterwards? So see, this one is supposed to be on the outside corner. Have I made lots of quilts? Yeah. Do I still make mistakes? Absolutely. That's an easy one. There's a reason why I don't backstitch on my quilts like this. So I don't backstitch generally when I'm starting and stopping. It makes tearing it out just a little bit easier and less damage. So I will fix that so that it's available. I don't have to fix it later. All right. Truly signing off.